Hi there. Have you ever been outside in the real world and thought, wow, this sucks. Everything is grey, everyone hates everyone, and the nicest building in my town is the goddamn big Tesco. Now obviously living in the UK doesn't help. There are like 2 cool British people, and that's about it. When life gets me down, I've found that escapism helps a lot. And for me at least, there is no better way of escaping than playing a video game. I mean, think about it. Entire new worlds created by teams full of the Earth's most creative and artistic minds, driven by great storytellers and programmers alike, and the culmination of all this talent results in the real world. I mean, this is just everything I said at the start of the video, but without the big Tesco. I think there's a viewpoint in large parts of the gaming industry that better graphics equals looking more like real life. And don't get me wrong, there is definitely some merit to this statement. There's something very impressive about playing a game that looks real. Why would I pay £10,000 to go to the Maldives when I can go for £50 via Hitman 2 and I get to throw fish at people? But why is this lauded as the best that visuals can get and this isn't? Well, first we got to understand the 2 types of graphic that I'll call fidelity and style. But window ledge, what's the difference? First of all, thanks for playing along, even though I know you already know the difference. Second of all, I'm about to tell you. In the context of games, fidelity can be defined as the level of graphical complexity present. A higher fidelity can mean a sharper image, but it is also increasingly being used to describe something as being more true to life. It's a term used in many current generation console games as a setting that makes the game even more realistic, and I'll talk about that later. For this video, I'm defining art style as the general aesthetic of the game and the universe that you are trying to create. Now, it's important to note that every game has an art style and also a level of graphical fidelity, but what sets them apart is how they are balanced. Putting more effort into creating a graphically complex game normally means gravitating towards realistic visuals, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm finding it morally challenging to call realism an art style, but it is. Though I would call it the baseline because, you know, it's just what I see out my window. There isn't really anything new going on. And I want to put this out there early on. This video is not meant to dunk on realistic looking games. They are some of the most impressive forms of media out there, made by so many talented people. I just think we should give more credit to these ones. So now that I've established the definitions, or at least what I'll be using for this silly little video of mine, why doesn't every game look like this? Well, there's a few reasons. First, and probably most obviously, developing games with a higher graphical fidelity is expensive, due to needing more people to work on it and for longer. The development of Cyberpunk 2077 reportedly cost over $430 million and 8 years of time before releasing in a top-notch state, then taking another 3 years after that to reach where it is today. This type of cost rivals some of the biggest budget films ever and can obviously only really be done with huge teams and massive amounts of funding. And what really sucks is how much developers and artists are overworked in order to meet deadlines as to appease the funders. This crunch culture is mainly done to minimize the development cost of a game, because why would Naughty Dog and Sony pay for a few months more wages when they can just try and kill their employees instead? As gaming grows as an industry and games start focusing more on pure graphical complexity, this abuse of worker rights will sadly become more common. Another reason is simply a design choice. Not every game wants to look like real life. It's very dependent on the type of game you're making because the visuals can really help to reflect the mood. For example, in Hi-Fi Rush, its light-hearted and silly, goofy nature is reflected in its cartoony visuals. If you took everything about this game, like the music, the story, the gameplay, the characters, if you had all of this in the style of Resident Evil, it just wouldn't work. Though it would be pretty funny. Likewise, if Modern Warfare 3 and all its themes of war and suffering was made to look like Kirby's Epic Yarn, it might actually make me buy the game, but that's beside the point. So what we've gathered so far is that games can benefit from looking different visually. Realism fits the mood for some, but not others. Now you may be thinking, wow, this is something I knew before the video started. Anyway, let's move on. The pursuit of absolute realism feels like the main focus for game companies. The current generation of consoles are marketed with a 4K, HDR, VRR, 8K, 10,000 FPS 4D experience to reach lifelike visuals, only for my most played games to be Rocket League and Minecraft. Now obviously everyone has different preferences for what they want to play, but do we really need all this? The system requirements for games to run in an acceptable state are rising rapidly, only for minor improvements in graphics. The most graphically realistic game I've played, in my opinion, is still The Last of Us Part 2, and that runs on a base PS4, which recently turned 10 years old. All other visuals, in my opinion, are on par with this, or, you know, just like slightly better, but require like 10 times more processing power. Now, I've said this in my last video, but I don't care. City Skylines 2 looks pretty much the same as the first game, but requires 15 times as much storage space, and to run it at 60 FPS, you need a £2,000 graphics card. What is going on? Is this conspiracy made to sell more expensive hardware while disguising higher requirements as better visuals? Did we reach the peak of graphical fidelity years ago? It fucking feels like it. And don't get me started on ray tracing, man, oh my god. The only time I notice when ray tracing is turned on is when my computer starts running the game 50% worse. Now I know what you're thinking, Window Ledge. Why are you showing footage of Portal 1 when you're talking about ray tracing? That game came out in 2007. Well, you're right, but you're also wrong. This is actually Nvidia's Portal with ray tracing, which came out last year, and I bet you didn't even notice the difference. That's how subtle ray tracing is, that you can barely tell the difference between it and a game that came out 16 years ago. But is this all the result of graphics surpassing hardware, or just poor optimization? Hint. It's the second one. Increasing focus on making games look slightly better is putting insane amounts of pressure on developers, meaning things are getting released in horrible states. The only technical improvement as a result of better hardware that I can safely say is a good thing, and that needs to be implemented more, is faster loading times due to faster storage. This is very apparent in these two. Playing Starfield after Cyberpunk feels like uncovering a relic from an ancient civilization, even though it came out 3 years after. Pretty much every door requires a loading screen. More games should try to focus on making a seamless experience rather than going all out on visuals. Now, I want to reiterate that I am not trying to diminish the work that goes into creating realistic experiences. They are genuinely so impressive. I just think we're getting to a point where the effort and money needed to make something look slightly better isn't really worth it. And I'll be the first to admit, I think I let my emotions get the better of me about a minute ago, so now for the remainder of the video I'm going to talk about something nice. Games with nice art styles that don't require the IBM Summit in order to run. Earlier on I said that the art style really helps to match the mood, so when I think of a pretty serious game, I'm going to lead towards the idea that realism might be the way to go. So if I were to ask you to imagine the art style of a survival horror set in a dark dystopian future driven by a heartbreaking story, you probably wouldn't think of top-down pixel art, but that's what Signalis is, and it is hauntingly effective. You explore a dark government facility in the aftermath of a mysterious event, riddled with creepy enemies and cryptic puzzles. While it may seem retro, it keeps things modern with great lighting and reflections. It is an isolating experience that is able to build a greater and more tense atmosphere than any of the Resident Evil games that Signalis seems to be inspired by, all without the AAA budget. What I love is how unique the visuals are. There's these frequent cut-ins of mysterious imagery and messages that help to enhance the horror while pushing forward the story, and the craziest part is that this game was made by 2 people. This goes to show just how much you can do with so little, and that your art style doesn't have to be high-fidelity realism in order to be taken seriously. Next up is Hi-Fi Rush, and where do I even start? This is a miracle video game. Every inch of this world is perfectly crafted to look like it's straight out of a comic book. It's so bright and colourful and fun. And they could have just stopped there, but no. They made it so every asset of the environment moves and syncs with the music. It's so expressive, I can't begin to imagine how much effort went into it. It's an example of a AAA developer doing something different with the funding, and I hope we see more like it. But what I'll never forgive Microsoft for is the actual $0 0 cents spent on marketing this game. The day it was announced was the day it was released, and it seems they are unsatisfied with the sales. How bizarre. For a game that took 6 years of development, this is an insane move, even for Microsoft's standards. Finally, I'm going to talk about a game that actually does require a supercomputer to run, Alan Wake 2. This game leans heavily into realism but still tries to create unique imagery, sprinkling in the supernatural at points. Like Signalis, it has these abrupt cuts to weird stuff, which I really like if you couldn't tell. It does incredible things with the lighting and utilizes fast loading times to jump you from one place to the other almost instantly. When you think it can't look any more real, it cuts to an actual real-life talk show segment. And look, that's the actor who plays Alan Wake, titular character of Alan Wake. He's a writer, and his books follow the life of Alex Casey. But Alex Casey, character written by Alan Wake, is played by Sam Lake, and Sam Lake wrote Alan Wake. And a big part of the plot is that Alan Wake is stuck in a lake, but it isn't actually a lake. Maybe it's a wake? This is probably the easiest part of the game to understand. It is extremely meta and confusing, and I think the art direction helps to reflect this. Though I will say you need a lot of processing power in order to run it, even without ray tracing. I think it could be optimized a bit better, but I'll look past it because I like Sam Lake. There's no denying the fact that any game you've played has taken a great amount of effort in order to make it look the way it is. Ones that look real life are extremely impressive, but I think we should give more credit to these ones too, because they are also very impressive. The strive for higher fidelity is creating very immersive experiences, but also comes with its fair share of problems, such as development time and poor working conditions. Personally, I think we've reached a point where the effort it takes to make a game look slightly better just isn't worth the development cost, or the cost of new components for the consumer. Again, I think The Last of Us 2, among other games, is a good example of the visuals that developers don't need to surpass, because many games coming out nowadays only look marginally better, but wouldn't have a hope in hell of running on the PS4. Trying to improve on this level of fidelity is just not worth the time or money, and oh, for God's sake.